Assalamu alaikum, everyone. We'll give a few seconds for if anyone's going to join in. And first of all, thank you guys so much for taking the time to watch this live if you're watching it. And if not, if you're watching it afterwards, assalamu alaikum to you too. Today, we're going to be discussing a topic that is so, subhanAllah, so extremely relevant and so necessary for us to reflect on. Social media has become such an embedded part of our life that sometimes we forget that it's something really that only came about in maybe the past 2 decades. And the level to which we engage with that today is something very new to us. So this is going to be an opportunity, inshallah, for us to step back and reflect on what is social media actually doing for us in our lives and how is it affecting the quality of our lives. So today's topic is going to be social media and the mental health crisis. So bismillah wa salatu wa salam ala rasulillah. So I am a PA, and for those of you guys who don't know what a PA is a medical provider, one of the types of medical provider in the United States. So I practice medicine, and as a medical practitioner, I'm trained to evaluate and diagnose and treat mental illnesses. So this is something that is very relevant to me as a provider because I'm seeing patients from all walks of life coming in with different types of mental illnesses, and in order for me to even be able to evaluate them properly, I have to be able to think, okay, what is it that's contributing to their mental illness? There's been a lot of research in the recent decade that has focused on the impact of social media on mental health. And honestly, it has started to ring a lot of alarm bells for us. And for Muslims in particular, it's it should be something that we really are careful about, because we know that whenever we're talking about something that's impacting mental health, what follows slowly after is spiritual health, right? Because our spiritual health affects our mental health in certain ways, and our mental health affects our spiritual health in certain ways, right? So there is a correlation, there is an impact. That's not to say that if you are someone who has mental illness or suffers from mental illness that you are automatically spiritually unhealthy. That's not what I'm saying. But what I am saying is that we do know very well from both research and from our Islamic principles that they do impact one another in particular ways. So SubhanAllah, when we look at the data on mental illnesses, not just in the United States where I'm at, but across the world, mental illness used to be a slow burning fire. People experienced it. Things happen, life happens, and some people are maybe more predisposed to it genetically as well. But it used to be a slow burning fire, meaning as much as people experienced mental illness, we had the opportunity to kind of address it, and it wasn't at epidemic or pandemic proportions. It was a small portion of the population. What used to be a slow burning fire, social media has added gasoline to it. It has just completely set this fire ablaze, meaning this tool, which initially was intended for good purpose for many, ended up becoming a tool that perpetuated very unhealthy habits for a lot of people. And now we are dealing with the consequences and having to ask ourselves, what is social media in the future going to be doing to the health of our minds and the health of our souls, more importantly? Now, social media obviously has its advantages, and we'll talk about those. But in Islam, we are taught to evaluate everything with the wisdom. So, as you guys know, if you guys watch any previous lives of mine, I always like to give us a certain framework to think about whatever topic we're looking at. And so today's framework is going to start off with wisdom. Let's look at social media through the framework of wisdom. And if I had to define wisdom, wisdom is really being able to see in between the lines when it comes to what is happening around us, and the having the deeper understanding behind the purpose in what we use in our day-to-day lives, right? Obviously, the greatest wisdom is that we are doing in spending time with tools and people and occasions that are going to somehow benefit us in our relationship with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. That's the highest wisdom that we can have. And when we think about social media using the sons of wisdom, the advantages in what 40, and they had actually done a study on this and found that the highest advantage that people had said social media had, which was 40% of people, They said that the biggest advantage was it helped you to connect with people across the world, right? It helped you to keep connections with people. Maybe, someone has moved across the country. That's what most of us claim to use it for. So that's one of the benefits. Maybe another benefit is you're able to access certain information about things. Maybe you follow Islamic channels, or you have certain interests like science, or medicine or cooking channels, and you enjoy following that content. So there's benefit in that. But then wisdom tells us we have to look at the disadvantages as well, right? So here are a few disadvantages for us to just think about as we proceed in our discussion. So first off, it's a common conception. We know this. Social media distorts our perception of reality. This is just a fact. We are going to be seeing things that are not real, from the fact that people will post pictures, and right before they post pictures, they will edit the pictures tremendously. There are obviously apps like Facetune and other Photoshop-esque type of apps that are made to manipulate images. So when they're posted, they look like the best version of themselves. When people are taking a picture to post, they're not taking one and posting it. They're often taking 10 or 20 or sometimes 50, and then posting the quote unquote perfect picture. When people are posting online, or writing comments or whatever it might be, they're going to be speaking about the best part of their lives. They're going to show, if you see, for example, a married couple, they're not going to be posting pictures of themselves fighting, or when someone's crying, or when someone's hurt, or when hard times come. They're going to be posting about the fun times, the dinners and the vacations, and the times that they match, their outfits match when they go out. And so, us constantly seeing this altered version of a reality affects our understanding of what's real. As a second disadvantage, directly connected to the first one, is this perpetuates anxiety and depression symptoms, especially for those who are already dealing with it. And I want you guys to think about this. Have you ever found yourself scrolling I have Instagram, for example, scrolling on Instagram, and all of a sudden you're starting to feel your mood lower? You're starting to kind of feel like maybe this little air of sadness, or maybe it's not full sadness, but it's discontentment. And you're kind of like, where is this coming from? SubhanAllah. That is the reality of when you're seeing the highlight reel of other people's lives. And then, an automatic thing we're going to do is compare that highlight reel to the struggles we're dealing with in our lives. And that can activate depression symptoms very easily. And then again, if you're already predisposed to that, it can make it even worse. As for the anxiety piece, one thing that social media has done that previously we'd never had to deal with is social media can also force us to be constantly viewing the bad and the evil of the world. Now, awareness is always good. I'm not someone who says, turn off the news and don't look at anything. We need to know the types of oppressions that we're dealing with in the world. We're Muslims. We're supposed to care about that. We have to care about how we enact justice in the world. And to do that, we need to be aware of what the problems are. But when we're living in this place where we're constantly bombarded by the evil of the world, it becomes so overwhelming for us. It can really just again light, it's gasoline on a fire inside of us, because it's not just, okay, here's an issue in my community. It's, look at what's happening across the world. In this country, there's war happening here, there's murder happening here, there's theft happening here, there's, you know um, children are dealing with with this test. It can be so overwhelming for us, and then that perpetuates anxiety for us, and it can leave us stifled and unable to even do anything. So it ends up really leading to unproductivity. The other thing, and this is something that there's a lot of research that's been done on this from a neurobiological perspective. Social media promotes addictive behavior, especially in young people. And when I say young, I'm not just talking about 9-year-olds, 10-year-olds, I'm talking about early 20s as well. In young people whose prefrontal cortex, i.e., the very front portion of your brain, where the ability to manage impulses, it affects them because that's not matured yet. And so I recently heard, this was actually a really helpful metaphor to use, but social media, right? The actual apps, the companies will hire engineers who specifically study addictive and gambling behaviors, okay? So that they can take this app that we use and incentivize us to use it more and more and more. So this addictive behavior is you have people who are taking the research and taking the marketing and then literally engineering an app to play on that for us. And someone said, and obviously gambling is hot on for us, right? So I hope nobody knows what this experience is like, but I'm sure you can imagine it, as gambling is an extreme addiction for a lot of people, one of the top addictions in the Western world, especially. This a researcher on social media addiction had essentially said, imagine going to Las Vegas. And for those of you guys who are not from the United States, Las Vegas is essentially the gambling capital of the United States. People will literally take vacations there to go to the casinos and gamble. Imagine someone going to Las Vegas and they're playing the slot machine. And those of you guys, put money, you pull the lever, you see what you get, and you hope you're gonna get money back. It's a low level gambling for a lot of people because you're not putting a lot of money in, but it is extreme. Again, it plays on that dopamine rush. He's like, you go to Las Vegas, you play that game, but you go home. Now imagine taking the slot machine with you and you're constantly pulling that lever. He said that is a level of addiction that social media can cause for people. And when you think about it, I mean, it's not that hard. Hey, I have my phone right next to me. Like, it's not that hard to imagine. Think about when your phone goes off or you hear a buzz, or I don't know if my ringer's off, so my phone will only vibrate. As soon as I hear that vibration from my phone, my first instinct is to reach for my phone. And I've started questioning that for myself. Like, whoa, what if I'm in the middle of something? What if I'm having a conversation or talking to a friend or my mom before, and then that buzzes, and the first thing my hand does is reach for it? That's such an addictive pattern that we don't even realize. Because anything else, if someone was coming up to me and I was busy with something, I can look at them and say, oh, give me 5 more minutes and let me finish this up and I'll get back to you. But we can't even do that with our phones. But again, this is because of the addictive potential of it. So that's not to necessarily blame you if you are finding that you have addictive tendencies, but it's to bring awareness. We can't do anything without awareness. We cannot change unproductive behavior or unhealthy behaviors without having awareness of it first. Moving on to the next disadvantage. Social media promotes ghafla. It promotes our distraction from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And most obviously, it is a huge time waster. It promotes wasting time. The Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam, honestly, I think about this and I think about how disappointed he would be if he knew, and I'm saying, you guys, I'm saying this to myself included, if he knew how much time we spent on social media just for the plain fact of having entertainment. Imagine him thinking, "Whoa, we're living in 2020, whatever year it is that you guys are watching this in, and we have so many time-saving technologies, right? We have computers now. When we want to study something, we don't have to go travel to another region to access a library to find the book on this particular topic. We can just Google it." Right, we don't have to sit there and plant our own wheat to make bread. We could just go buy it from the store. Imagine if the Prophet ﷺ knew how much we have that saves us time, and then with all of this free time, what do we do with it? Back to the point of awareness, right? This is not for us to shame ourselves and we're such horrible people. It's to bring awareness that we have all this time, this barakah that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala gave us, this blessing of time, and we're ripping the barakah out of it because we're wasting it doing things that don't benefit us. It makes us laugh, yeah, like entertainment is okay every now and then. I'm not here to say don't have fun, don't be entertained, but recognize that there's a time and a place for it. And the biggest right that our soul has upon us is that we spend time benefiting it. And then another huge right that our soul has upon us is that we spend time seeking knowledge and connecting with people of knowledge and connecting with people of deen so that we can protect ourselves. Because at the end of the day, we're going to stand before Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala with it. Right. And so if social media is something that's distracting us from it, we have to be super mindful of that. We're going to talk about one way to manage this in later on, inshallah, towards the end of our talk. But moving on to the next disadvantage, social media point blank does damage to your heart from an Islamic tazkiyah perspective. I know we can't, I don't have the neurobiological research on this, but I can tell you from what we know from an Islamic perspective, it is damaging to our heart. Even the reminders that we're getting, those constant, healthy, good remind, maybe you're following an Islamic channel, whatever it might be, those reminders are coming in little blips. They are not knowledge, they're not solitude, they're not time spent with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. They're good reminders. I'm not saying unfollow, but I'm saying let's shift our energy and our perspective to wanting more for ourselves when it comes to benefiting our hearts, and keeping an eye on what are we using to as excuses to keep ourselves on social media when we could be using something better. By the way, guys, if you hear any noise in the background, someone is just mowing mowing the lawn outside. So the last point that I'll make before moving on to talking about some of the research on social media and mental health is social media. One of the worst things it does, in my opinion, is it normalizes sin and it normalizes lack of adab, because that's what gets views. You don't sit there and watch, the super when you think about what's trending on TikTok. What's trending on TikTok isn't usually like Islamic reminders and things about how to, better ourselves. It's things that will make us laugh, or things that will make us wide-eyed and ooh, this is so interesting. And a lot of times those things include sin and include rudeness. I think about some of the prank videos I see where people are just doing some outrageous things to strangers on the street, strangers in grocery stores, and it blows my mind, because I think, subhanallah, if someone did that to me, if I was a person being pranked in that video, I would feel so uncomfortable having a camera in my face as someone tried to make a fool of me. And yet we watch that and we laugh as if that person on the other end of it doesn't have feelings, as if that person doesn't have emotions, right? Oftentimes when things trend and we're laughing at them, we don't think about the fact that that was a person that didn't necessarily consent to being filmed and didn't consent to going viral on the internet. Think about if it was your mother or your father or a sibling or someone you loved who was being made a fool of, right? And so that's the lack of edit. That's not something that we're supposed to be comfortable with. And yeah, I say it for myself. I see those videos and sometimes I laugh, but I have to remind myself that that's not normal. A Muslim is not supposed to look at that and find that to be normal. We should step back and be like, whoa, what are we what honor are we actually giving to people in situations like that? We're not. We're taking their honor away from them when we do that. We're dishonoring them. So moving on, the big question: does social media lead to mental illness? Again, I studied medicine, and you have to be super careful about how you word conclusions in research. So I can't say social media equals mental illness. That's not necessarily the case. There are going to be people who use social media responsibly. There are going to be people who know how to manage it and are able to manage its mental health effects. But what I can say is, for the overwhelming majority of individuals who are using social media, young, mostly young, but also old, is it makes you more vulnerable for sure to mental illness, or it exacerbates what was already there. So if you maybe already had, let's say, maybe it's diagnosed or undiagnosed, but you had some sort of mental illness, it's going to make it's again gasoline on a fire. It's going to make it worse. But maybe you are kind of riding the edge. You have a few coping mechanisms or things that are buffering the effect of mental illness for you. It very well can be the thing that pushes you off the edge into mental illness. And when I say mental illness, by the way, guys, going back to the fact I am a medical provider, when I say mental illness, I do not mean symptoms of mental illness. I mean actually diagnosable mental illnesses that have an impact on our daily functioning. Uh, Depression is not a mental illness. It is a symptom. It is an experience we have. Major depressive disorder, right, is a mental illness. So there's a difference. So I just want to put that out there. One thing that is actually interesting, if you kind of keep up with the news, is Facebook and Instagram and TikTok and other social media platforms are actually being put on trial in front of Congress. And again, for those of you guys who are watching that might not be from the United States, Congress is United States Parliament, essentially. It's being put in front of Congress in trial because we are recognizing that the overwhelming use of social media and the lack of regulation around it is really affecting it's becoming a public health crisis. It's affecting our self-esteem, it's affecting our sleep patterns, it's affecting our socialization, the way we interact, the way what is considered normal in society, our real-time connection with people. It is ending up being one of the best ways for predators to find victims. um, it is a primary opportunity for grooming for young people. Again, sorry about the sound in the background if you guys are hearing it. The FBI at this point, and again, which is the Federal Bureau of Investigation in the United States, cannot keep up anymore with the level of pedophilic grooming, i.e., um, individuals who are adult age grooming young children, it's majority young girls, to essentially sell into human trafficking. And that's terrifying when one of the biggest task force on this is saying we don't have the technology to be able to do anything about this because of social media. Social media has just made it so accessible and so easy. And then you have this hugely vulnerable population that's being introduced to social media for the first time, this young grouping. And think about elementary ages, right? 8-year-olds, 9-year-olds, and no one's monitoring them. And then it just becomes a perfect ground for breeding ground for this type of dangerous behavior. One we talked already about in the very beginning of how our reality is distorted, right? When you first have a reality that used to be based on merit, used to be based on, okay, let me prove myself as an individual. Now we have a split reality where you can be anyone who you want to be. You can fake your life and who your personality to gain clicks and likes, and the real world is non-existent, right? One thing that is very scary, and it kind of goes back to what we talked about promoting sin in adab, is research has shown that empathy, which is an insanely important trait and quality that we need to have as Muslims, but aside from it being so important to Muslims, is the fact that without empathy, society is destroyed. It is when you think about the worst massacres and the worst things that are happening in the world today and in history, it had to happen because empathy had to have been ripped out from people's hearts. Empathy has statistically, by measure, decreased, and has decreased in people who are using social media. It is now, it's actually very scary when I think about it. I'm not going to talk too much about it, but it's just so insane when you think about it, because we would hope that we become more empathetic with time, right? More empathetic as we're being exposed to more information about what's going on in the world, but that's not the case. The lifetime prevalence of any mental disorder among adolescents, and adolescence is essentially kind of late, early teenagehood, the point of time where you're especially going through puberty. The lifetime prevalence is 49.5%. We'll say 50%, 50% for the sake of making it easy. That's terrifying to think about. It never used to be that high. We're talking about 1 in every 2 adolescents. So pull a 12-year-old or 13, you'll have 2. 1 out of them will have a mental disorder. Remember what I said earlier? Mental disorder, it does not mean they have the symptom of depression or they have the symptom of anxiety. That means they actually fit a criteria, a diagnostic criteria of a health disorder that is affecting their daily functioning. And for most of that 50%, what we know is that it's going to continue to follow them into adulthood. And then that same adult, is going to be raising the next generation. And so we just send ourselves into a whirlpool because we're not thinking about how are we regulating this. So it's not affecting us in promoting such harm to our mental health. Um, the Journal of the American Medical Association Psychiatry found that adolescents who use social media more than 3 hours per day may be at heightened risk of mental health problems, particularly internalizing problems. That's again saying the same thing that I'm saying, which is they say maybe at height, and we know that it does heighten risk. This is medical language. You have to be careful when we're doing research, like I'd mentioned earlier. Internalizing problems, it essentially means their ability to recognize through their worldview that what's happening is not necessarily a reflection of them, right? If I see a bunch of evil in the world, or if I see something wrong happen, when I walk outside, my immediate thought isn't normally supposed to be everything in the world is chaotic, everything is horrible, right? Or if I see someone who looks really, done up in she's wearing a really pretty dress, and I think, oh, she looks really good, it shouldn't automatically make me turn inward and say, well, I look horrible, I don't look pretty, I'm not pretty, oh, nobody's gonna like me, because that's not a normal thought process. But social media distorts that, because instead of it being a one-time occasion where I go aside and I see this, I'm seeing it 10, 20, 30, 40, 50, 100 times in a day. And so you now create that internalization problem. Moving on, I mean, social media is, we already know this, the epidemic of loneliness is something so insane. It is something that we're doing a lot of research around in terms of the heightened prevalence of depressive disorders and other mood disorders, linking it to the fact that we have socially isolated ourselves, especially in Western countries, in ways that previously were not common. Right, communal cultures, especially cultures where you were connected to family, neighbors knew who you knew who your neighbor was, and you would play with the neighbor kids. That is slowly being done away with, and as a substitute, because we're human beings who need social connection, when what we previously were using is no longer there, well, we need to find a substitute, or we'll literally go crazy. And so people have found a substitute in social media, but social media is never going to be a replacement for actual human connection. So the epidemic of loneliness is something that's going to continue to spiral out of control. The suicide rate for pediatric patients rose 57.4% from 2007 to 2018. That is insane to think. And again, this is another thing that's being linked to social media use, because the ability to bully a child into suicide is so much higher when you have a tool to do that. Where it used to be that you would go to school and get bullied, and then come home, and there would be some sort of you know retreat from that harm. Now it can be a 24/7 issue. Muslims are not immune to this. I know of young teenagers in our own community who have committed suicide. Saying it's haram doesn't make someone who's in the mindset less likely to do it. We need to think about prevention. So now that we've talked all about this, we have kind of a short few minutes left, but I want to talk about practically what is it that we can do to actually benefit ourselves and protect ourselves from the harms of social media. Those disadvantages can go on and on and on. I'm not saying you have to delete your social media, but we need to again use the framework of wisdom to think about what can we do. So here are a few things that I've kind of come up with or seen the research promote that can help us to monitor and manage our social media use and help mitigate the effects or the negative effects that it would have on our mental health and then on our spiritual health as well. The first thing I will say is I highly recommend that you take regular social media fasts. Start tuning into yourself. When you're noticing that as you're going through, you're finding yourself anxious, or you're finding that low mood starting to creep up, or maybe you're finding other people doing well and you're starting to feel jealous. That's a very scary thing in terms of diseases of the heart, from an Islamic perspective. We're starting to, maybe we see other people doing well and we love that they're doing well, but then it makes us feel like we're not doing well. That's leading to ingratitude, which is also very scary. So taking regular social media fasts, post, hey guys, I'm going to be off for a month, or I'm going to be off for 2 months. I would recommend an extended period of time, not just 2 weeks, because it actually gives our brain time to recover from the addiction portion of it. And delete your apps, and log out, or deactivate, or whatever it needs to be, and limit your access, and commit to actually not doing it. The thing you want to do though before taking that social media fast is you're going to have some free time. So think about what you're going to do to fill that free time, so you're not tempted to go back. You're dealing with an addiction. Even if you're not severely addicted, there's no one who's using social media who is unaffected to some degree, or who is not affected to some degree by the addictive potential of social media. The next thing I would say is use accountability measure. If you are someone who finds yourself not even knowing how much time you spend on social media, if you have an iPhone, you can go to, let me see, if you go to settings and you go to, give me a second, y'all. I will find this for you. Oh, you go to settings and then look for screen time and press screen time, and it'll tell you how often you spend, how many hours you spend on screen time. I'm looking at mine right now. And if you click on the day specifically, it'll show you, let me see. You click see all activity. It'll show you which apps you've spent, and how much time you spent on them. So for example, today I'll be completely transparent with you guys. I spent, where to go? Where are we at? I spent 3 minutes on WhatsApp. I spent 30 minutes on Instagram already. I've been up for a few hours. So, but that's good for me to know. And I actually have a 30-minute limit, and that's another accountability. So you can set limits on how much time you can spend on certain apps, or you can download an app that's going to lock you out of social media apps completely after a certain amount of time. So I actually have I was at 29 minutes. I have a 30-minute limit on my Instagram use, and it'll buzz me and show me in a pop-up that says you have, you know, 15 minutes left or whatever it might be. Next thing that I would say about protecting yourself from the harms of social media is lowering your gaze applies to social media too. We can do an entire video on this. Unfollow the people who you are following that are feeding your shahwa, your desires, that are feeding your nafs. If you are following someone who you know is not an example, this is not the person you want to be standing with on Yom Al You are not following them because they are inspiring and happy. You're following them because they are attractive, or they feed your nafs, or whatever it is. They bring out the parts of you that that the Prophet ﷺ would not be proud of. Unfollow them. Lowering your gaze applies to social media too. Okay, that constant feeding that we're getting, and you know what? Actually, Absala, can you mark this as one of the topics for us to do in the future, inshallah? Lowering your gaze on social media. The harm that it does, I can't even overstate it. I'm going to move on to the next one. We'll inshallah try to do a live on this, or maybe an article on this in the future. I talked about the accountability measures, using apps or putting limits on it for on your apps. Unfollow those who are not serving you. And when I say not serving you, I mean they are not benefiting you. And I'm not talking just about the lowering your gaze part. Unfollow the people that make you feel bad about yourselves, right? If you're seeing someone and you end up feeling worse about yourself after seeing their account, unfollow them. And guess what? Listen, if it is a friend or someone, you can mute them or whatever it is if you don't want to unfollow them. But don't feel like, oh, I have to continue to. A point of maturity is just being able to say unfriend, unfollow, whatever. If someone is not serving you, if they are posting things that are not in alignment with your values, you can unfollow them. And if they say, hey, why do you unfollow me? You can say, I choose who I follow on my social media platform. I love and respect you as a person. I just didn't feel like what you were posting was aligning with what I believe or what my values are, and I don't want to expose myself to it. It's simply that. No hard feelings. There's no. This isn't a subtweet, as you, you know, as the youngins say. It's being protective of your space and what you're exposing yourself to and what you're consuming. You have a bigger responsibility to your soul and your heart than you do to making people feel, appreciated because you're following them. Be mindful of what you repost and like. You are held accountable for what you're reposting and liking as much as you are what you say in real life. The scary thing about social media is the fact that when we post something, it's not there. It's not 5 seconds of us saying it. It is there for 24 hours. It is there for a lifetime, whatever it is. And every time someone gets exposed to that, we are getting the sin for it. That's very scary. Go through your social media, delete the things that you know are promoting sin or promoting haram, something that has a cuss word in it, something of showing you doing something that you should not be doing. Because every time there's a hadith about this, right? That when you lead a person to sin, you get the you get the measure of their sin as well because you led them to it. We don't want that. I don't know about you. I don't want that. I don't want that for you. So be very mindful of what you're posting and what you're liking. And the last point I'll make is learn how to spend time alone. We use social media as a substitute for human interaction. I talked about the epidemic of loneliness in our current time. Sometimes sometimes solitude is the best way to spend our time. Spending time alone, spending time really like in the discomfort of being alone, it's information for us. If we're so uncomfortable being alone, it it should tell us something. Do we not like ourselves? Are there certain things maybe we're not proud of that we're doing? Are there certain gaps in our relationship with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala that become much more visible or obvious when we're spending time alone? When you're going to sleep, right, and you're going to sleep, do you find yourself having difficulty getting off your phone? That's a really big sign that we need to practice spending time alone, because it means that um we're trying to bury something by distracting ourselves. And when we do that, we're never gonna be able to fully bury it to sit and grow roots and continue to bother us. But we have an opportunity to really transform our lives and deal with that pain, do that healing, reconnect with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala in a meaningful way that benefits us, and really find a lot of contentment and joy in our lives. Maybe not immediately, but through unwinding these habits. So you guys, I hope that this was super helpful for you. There was a lot of time and research that had to go into this. It's such a huge topic, and so important for us to think about for ourselves. If you have young kids, if you're an uncle or an aunt or a mentor, whoever you are, think about how you can better your use of time in your interactions in relationship with social media, and how you can help others around you to do that. I ask Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to accept from us and all of those who have watched or will watch this. I ask Him to allow us to be people who are mindful and people who interact in our lives with wisdom, and who are using things in our vicinity to benefit ourselves and benefit our soul, benefit our heart, and ultimately benefit our relationship with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Subhanakallah wa bihamdik, nashhadu an la ilaha illa anta, nastaghfiruka wa natubu ilayk. A'udhu billahi minash shaitanir rajim. Bismillahir rahmanir rahim. والعصر إن الإنسان لفي خسر إلا الذين آمنوا وعملوا الصالحات وتواصوا بالحق وتواصوا بالصبر. Assalamu alaikum, everyone, and I will see you next time.